You're standing at a checkout line. The cashier scans the last item, and the screen lights up with your total, $6.66. And something in you flinches. You don't believe in curses. You're a reasonable person. But your eyes catch those 3 sixes lined up in a row, and for half a second, some old wiring in the back of your brain lights up and whispers a single word. Evil. You're not strange for feeling that. Almost everyone does. It might be the most feared number on the face of the earth. People refuse house addresses with it. Hospitals skip it on floor plans. A highway in America was renamed because drivers didn't want it on their road signs. 3 little digits, and the whole modern world treats them like a live wire. But here's the thing, nobody ever stops to ask, where did that fear actually come from? Who wrote that number down first, and what did they mean by it? To answer that, you have to leave the checkout line behind. You have to travel back almost 2,000 years across the ocean to a small island of black volcanic rock sitting alone in the Aegean Sea. The Romans used it as a prison. They sent people there to disappear. And on that rock, an old man is writing by the light of a low flame. His name is John. He is the last one left, the last man alive, who walked beside Jesus, who heard the voice, who watched it all happen with his own eyes. Now he's an old prisoner on a forgotten island, and his hands are shaking as he writes down a vision so strange it has frightened and fascinated people for 20 centuries. And in the middle of it, he writes a riddle. He says, in effect, let the person who has wisdom work this out. Count the number of the beast, because it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Pay attention to those words. The number of a man, not the number of a demon, not the number of Satan. A man, a human being, someone with a face and a name and a birthday, someone John's first readers knew exactly how to identify. And here is the detail that unravels almost everything you've been told. The man hiding inside that number was already dead when John wrote it down. Gone. In the grave for years, which means whatever 666 was pointing at it was never a barcode. It was never a microchip. It was never a credit card scanner waiting somewhere in your future. We'll get to who he was and how a dead man ended up as the most feared number in history. But not yet. First, you need to understand this. What you're afraid of is not a spell. It's a puzzle. And it came with a key that the people reading John's letter could turn in a matter of seconds. We just lost it. Somewhere across 2,000 years, the key slipped out of our hands, and the puzzle hardened into a superstition. So this is not a story about the devil. This is not a story about the end of the world. This is not a curse hiding inside your grocery receipt. This is the story of a dead emperor, a terrified church, and a code that means almost the exact opposite of what you've been taught to fear. Let me hand you back the key. To understand the riddle, you have to understand something the ancient world knew that we forgot. They had no separate symbols for numbers, none. There was no figure for 1, no figure for 5, no figure for 100 the way we have today. Instead, the letters of the alphabet did double duty. The first letter was also 1. The second letter was also 2. And so on up the alphabet, climbing into the tens and the hundreds. This was true in Hebrew. It was true in Greek. It was true in Latin, which means every single word ever written carried a hidden number inside it. Add up the letters of any name, and that name produced a total. The Greeks had a word for this little game. They called it isopsephia. The Jews called it gematria, and people played with it constantly. This wasn't dark magic whispered in back rooms. It was ordinary. Archaeologists digging through the ash of Pompeii found it scratched on a wall by some love-sick young man who didn't want to write his sweetheart's name out loud. He wrote, "I love the girl whose number is 545. His friends could puzzle it out. Strangers couldn't. It was a way of hiding a name in plain sight." Now hold on to that. A way of hiding a name in plain sight. Because that is exactly what John is doing on Patmos. He is not casting a spell. He is passing a note. And he's passing it in code for one very good reason, saying this name out loud could get you killed. So whose name was worth dying over? Here's where you meet him. Pull back from the island, away from the old man and his candle, and turn your eyes toward the center of the world in the 1st century. Rome. And on the throne of Rome sits a young man whose name still makes historians shudder. He took the throne as a teenager. He had his own mother killed. He had his wife killed. And in the summer of the year 64, a fire broke out in the city and burned for 6 days, devouring whole districts, leaving 100,000 people homeless in the smoke. The people whispered that the emperor himself had said it, that he wanted the land cleared to build a palace. And the emperor, hearing those whispers, needed someone else to blame. So he chose the smallest, strangest, most defenseless group in the city, a new sect. People who followed a crucified Jewish teacher, the Christians. What happened next was recorded not by the church, but by Rome's own historians' men, with no reason to make the Christians look like victims. Tacitus wrote it down. So did Suetonius. And what they describe is almost too much to read aloud. Believers were sewn into the skins of wild animals and thrown to dogs who tore them apart. Others were nailed to crosses. And when the sun went down, the emperor lit his garden parties with human beings. Followers of Jesus coated in wax and pitch set on fire, burning along the paths like living lamps so his guests could stroll by candlelight that used to be people. That was the world John's readers lived in. That was the shadow over every house church reading his letter, by oil lamp hearts pounding, wondering if the soldiers would come for them next. And this is where it gets remarkable, because now you understand why John couldn't just write the name. If a Roman soldier intercepted a letter that openly cursed the emperor, everyone connected to it was finished. So John does the one thing a clever 1st century writer could do. He takes the name and he turns it into a number. Now watch what happens next. The emperor's name and title in the form everyone used was Neron Kaiser Nero Caesar. Take that name and spell it the way a Jewish believer would in Hebrew letters. Then do what any reader steeped in gematria would do without even thinking. Add the letters up. The first letter 50, the next 200, then 6, then 50 again, then 100, then 60, then 200. Add them together, 666. The lock clicks open. The beast has a name, and the name is a man who really lived, really ruled, and really hunted the people, reading those very words. For 2,000 years, people have searched the future for the monster behind that number. But John's first readers didn't have to search at all. They knew exactly who he meant the moment they did the math. The number was never a prophecy about a credit card. It was a wanted poster for a Caesar. Let's stop for 1 second, because something just happened that I don't want you to miss. The most feared number on earth, the one that made you flinch at the checkout line, just turned into a man's name. Not a demon, not a doorway to the end of the world. A dead Caesar hidden in code by a frightened old man trying to comfort a hunted church. If that one shift changed how you see this number, do me a favor. Tap subscribe. This channel exists to hand the key back to people who were handed fear instead. And before you go any further, be honest with yourself for a moment. Before this video started, What did you actually think 666 meant? Hold that answer. You'll want it by the end, because we're not done, not even close. Here's the part nobody tells you. If you open certain Bibles and find your way to that verse about the number of the beast, you might notice a tiny footnote at the bottom of the page. And that footnote says something that has quietly unsettled readers for centuries. It says some manuscripts read 616. 616, not 666. For a lot of people, that footnote feels like a crack in the foundation. If this number is supposed to be some unbreakable cosmic code, how can the manuscripts not even agree on what it is? Skeptics love this. They point at it and say, look, they can't keep their own famous number straight. And if you've never heard this before, it can be genuinely unsettling. So let's walk straight into it, because the truth here is better than the legend. Start with the manuscripts themselves. The oldest surviving copy of this passage that we have on earth is a fragile scrap of papyrus pulled from the sands of Egypt near an ancient town called Oxyrhynchus. Scholars call it Papyrus 115. It dates to somewhere around 1700 years ago, older than nearly anything else we have for these words. And when researchers used special imaging to read its faded letters, they found something startling. It made headlines. This ancient copy, the oldest one in existence, doesn't say 666. It says 616. And it's not alone. A famous 5th century manuscript agrees with it. So which is right? And how do you lose 50 from the most famous number in the world? Stay with me, because this is where the so-called problem becomes the proof. Remember how we got the number in the first place. You take the emperor's name, you spell it in Hebrew letters, and you add them up. But names can be spelled more than one way. The fuller version, the way a Greek speaker said it, was Neron with that extra final sound. Spell Neron Caesar in Hebrew, add it up, and you land on 666. But there was a shorter, more Latin way to say it. Not Neron, just Nero. Drop that one final letter, and in Hebrew, that one letter happens to be worth exactly 50. Take 50 away from 666, and what are you left with? 616. Sit with that for a moment. The two numbers aren't fighting each other. They're pointing at the same man. One scribe spelled his name the long way and got 666. Another spelled it the short way and got 616. It's the difference between writing out Robert and writing Rob. Same person, two spellings. And the gap between them, that missing 50, is the fingerprint of a single dropped letter in a single emperor's name. The variant that was supposed to break the theory is actually the strongest evidence it was ever about Nero at all. And the early church knew this man was the answer. Go back to around the year 180, only a few generations after John died. A bishop named Irenaeus sat down to write about this very verse. He's the earliest Christian writer we have who tackles the riddle directly. And he tells us he didn't guess. He checked the oldest and most trusted copies he could find. He even mentions that some copies had the other reading and pushes back on it. But here's the line that should give you chills. Irenaeus says the number 666 was confirmed by people who had personally seen John, who had stood in front of the apostle, who had heard him with their own ears. The chain from the man on the rock to the page in your hands is shorter than you ever imagined. Now, there's one more thing, and it's the strangest piece of all. When Nero finally died, and we'll come back to how he died very soon, something eerie happened in the empire. People refused to believe he was really gone. Rumors spread from province to province that he hadn't died at all, or that he would rise again and come back at the head of an army to take his revenge. The Romans even had a name for this dread. We call it the Nero redivivus myth, the Nero who comes back from the dead. Think about what that does to a number. The beast in John's vision is wounded, looks dead, and then comes back. And the readers holding that letter are living in a world that genuinely believed their worst nightmare could return from the grave. The fear wasn't abstract. It was a name they thought they had buried and couldn't be sure would stay buried. Which brings us to the question we've been circling since the very beginning. If Nero is the man inside the number, then we have a problem. And it's the same problem I promised you at the very beginning. Nero died in the year 68. He took his own life as soldiers closed and abandoned and hunted the most powerful man in the world, dying alone and afraid. That was the year 68. But most scholars believe John wrote his vision on Patmos around the year 95. Do the math. That's nearly 30 years later, which means by the time the old man on the rock wrote down the number of the beast was already dust. The monster was a corpse. The face behind 666 had been in the grave for almost 3 decades. So why would John encode a dead man? Why hand a hunted church a secret name for an emperor who couldn't hurt anyone anymore? Here's the answer, and it changes everything. Because Nero was never the whole beast. He was only the first face of it. He was the clearest, cruelest example of something that did not die when he died, something that had risen before him and would rise again long after him. The beast was never one man. The beast was a pattern. It was power that demands to be worshipped. It was the throne that looks at a human being kneeling before God and says, no, kneel here instead. Kneel to me. Nero was just the version they could see. And John, in his wisdom, used the one face they all recognized to teach them how to spot every face that would come after. Because they did come after. They always do. Fast forward to the year 1666, London. A great fire roars through the city, and people across England are gripped with terror. Certain the numbers in the year itself prove the end has arrived. It didn't. Fast forward again to the year 2000, and the whole world holds its breath over a computer glitch some were sure would unlock the prophecies. It didn't. Then it was supermarket barcodes. People convinced the lines hid the mark. Then it was a microchip. Then it was something in a vaccine. On and on. It goes generation after generation, each one staring at its own technology and whispering the same frightened question. Is this it? Is this the beast? And every single generation makes the exact same mistake. They go looking for the beast in a machine, when John told them plainly to look for it in a man, and more than that, to look for it on a throne. Here is the part that the fear industry never wants you to understand. Lean in close, because this is the whole point. In the language of the Bible, numbers carry meaning. And the most important number in all of Scripture is 7. 7 is the number of completion. God made the world and rested on the 7th day. 7 is wholeness. 7 is perfection. 7 is the signature of God himself. Now look at 6. 6 is not evil. 6 is something far more haunting than evil. 6 is 7 that fell short. 6 is the number that climbs and reaches for heaven and stops one rung below. 6 is everything that tries to be God and can't. So what is 666? It's 6 said 3 times. It is the number of falling short, stacked and intensified and screamed at full volume. It is humanity reaching for the throne of God, crowning itself, calling itself divine and missing every time. One rung short of the 7th step forever. That's Nero. That's every tyrant who ever demanded to be worshipped. That's every empire that ever told frightened people to bow or burn. The beast is not a monster hiding under your bed. The beast is a mirror. It's the oldest temptation. There is the whisper from the very first garden that said you can be like God. 666 is the number of that whisper finally seated on the throne. And suddenly, an old story snaps into focus. 3 young men centuries before Nero, standing in front of another king who had built a golden image and commanded everyone to fall down and worship it. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. The music plays, the whole crowd drops to its knees, and 3 men stay standing because they understood what John's readers understood. The mark was never about a chip in your hand. It was always about a posture of the heart. Who will you bow to when bowing is the only way to stay safe? That is the question hiding inside the number. Not what's in your wallet, not what's in your arm. Who is on the throne of your life? So let me say it as plainly as I can. 6 is not the devil's number. 6 is not unlucky. 6 is not evil. 6 is the number of everything that tries to be God and can't. And the whole point of John's vision is that it never will. Because here's what almost nobody remembers about the book that gave us 666. It does not end with a beast. The beast loses. The book ends with a slain lamb standing alive, with every tear wiped away, with the city coming down out of heaven, and with a throne, the real one that no tyrant will ever sit on. The number was never meant to be the end of the story. It was a warning planted in the middle of a story that ends in light. So let's bring it home. If you remember nothing else from the last half hour, hold on to 3 things. The first is simple, and it's about history. 666 was never a magic spell or a secret demonic frequency. It was a coded name, a frightened first century believer could decode in a matter of seconds, sitting in a candlelit room, doing a little math that every child of that world understood. It pointed to a real emperor named Nero, who really lived, really ruled, and really died. The mystery that has haunted you for years was an open secret to the people it was actually written for. The second goes deeper, and it's about you. The mark of the beast was never about technology. It was never really about your hand or your forehead or the scanner at the store. From the very beginning, it was about one question and one question only. Who will you bow to when the music plays and the whole crowd kneels, and standing up could cost you everything whose name is on the throne of your life? That question doesn't live in some distant future. It's asking you something today. And the third one is the one I want you to carry out the door with you. For most of your life, you were handed this number wrapped in fear. You were taught to flinch at it, to skip it, to feel that cold drop in your stomach when it lined up on a screen. But you were taught to fear the wrong thing. The number can't touch you. 3 digits on a receipt have no power over your soul. The only thing in that ancient vision with any real power over you is the question it was always asking. And that question isn't trying to frighten you. It's trying to free you. Because go back one last time to that old man on the rock. John wasn't hunched over his candle trying to scare a hunted little church into nightmares. He was trying to set them free. He was telling people who might die that very week that the emperor on the throne was not the real king. That the beast, however loud, however cruel, falls one step short of God and always will. That the story does not end in fire. It ends in a lamb and a city of light and every tear wiped dry. That's not a curse. That's the best news a terrified person could ever hear. So before you go, be honest with me. Back at the very start, before you understood any of this, what did you actually think 666 meant? A barcode. The Antichrist, something in a microchip, drop it in the comments. I read them, and I think you'll be surprised how many people were carrying the exact same fear you were. And if this handed you back something you didn't know, you'd lost subscribe and stay with us. Every week, we take a verse the world has twisted into fear and turn it back into what it was always meant to be: light. Stop being afraid of the number. The number was never the point. Start watching the throne